How quickly could Jac Caglianone get to Kansas City? We'll dive into it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, where new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Well, if you're out there watching on YouTube, you would see right now on my screen that we're undergoing a little bit of a renovation for the backdrop that we have here. Also have a new lower thirds part where you can find my Twitter handle and my name for the new listeners out there. So kind of some new things that are going to be showing up here on the YouTube feed over the next few days. I'm going to be working on this back wall. I promise that for a lot of the loyal listeners out there, you're going to like what we do back here. But right now, it looks kind of trashy. I'll be honest with you. You can see some of the tacks and stuff hanging in the wall. We got some things that are displayed. We got another wallpaper thing over there behind my back. So, I would say that by Thursday, we could be looking at the entire new background, possibly Friday. If I don't get it this week, it will 100% be all ready and finished up by the beginning of next week. But if you do watch on YouTube, I know that probably matters to you because seeing a backdrop that's not very good isn't very appealing to the eye. But I promise you I'm going to be working on that today and tomorrow. Hopefully we can get it up before the next episode. But we're done talking about that because I know some of you are also listening on Spotify and Apple Music and all that type of stuff. So let's dive into our first segment today, which does pertain to a little bit of the breaking news that happened on Friday, which is that Jac Caglianone is going to be headed to Surprise alongside Blake Mitchell and Carter Jensen. So some young, talented, and top prospects in the system will all be showcased a little bit down in Surprise, Arizona, which is where we will be next month. About actually a month from now, we're going to be down in Surprise right after pitchers and catchers in report and right before the full squad workout. We'll actually be down there for the full squad workout. So we'll be having tons of coverage down there, episodes, interviews, video, all that great stuff. But Jac Caglianone is certainly going to be a talking point of Surprise. And I don't expect him to go out there and be playing alongside the regulars every single day. I'd imagine there will be at least one lineup or two lineups throughout spring training where he plays alongside, a lineup featuring Bobby Witt and Salvador Perez and Vinny Pasquantino. I certainly could see it. But that's not really what this segment's about. The segment's going to be about what really the plan is going to be for Jac Caglianone. And let me start this off by saying my expectation before hearing that he was going to be going to spring training, or reading, I should say, it was a great piece done by Annie Rogers, was that you have him play out the entirety of 2025 at the minor league level. It doesn't mean he has to stay in AA or doesn't mean he has to stay in AAA. He can progress throughout the year. He can start in Quad Cities, go to AA Northwest Arkansas, which is where I think he's actually going to start the season. And then he can make his way to Omaha. But my belief was you got to make sure he's really polished up and he's matured at the plate. Everything about his game is just locked down, right? He's great at the plate. He's got a great approach. They cut down on the swing and miss. Defensively, he's been good. You have all those things together, then you could start to look at 2026 and maybe as early as opening day 2026 and think that he could be that piece in your lineup, which that right now I think is still a little bit of my belief because we haven't seen Jac Caglianone at a or in the minor league level for a full season. We saw him for a snippet. It was also after the college season. He was at the Arizona Fall League. So we got some snippets there. It reminds me a lot of how they treated Bobby Witt Jr. in that first year in the organization. But then the COVID year threw off some things, so that it stunted the ability to truly progress him even quicker than he got to Kansas City. But he also was a high school player. The difference is Jac Caglianone was a college bat and one of the most prolific college bats when he was at Florida. And in this piece done by Annie Rogers, it is stated that if things are progressing well for him and he's dominating at the plate, right? He's tearing up AA pitching, AAA pitching. They would try him in the outfield a little bit. And what I gathered from that is that there is a real world possibility where Jac Caglianone goes to Northwest Arkansas. He hits, let's say, 340. Let's say he hits 340 in the first 2 months of the season, or even just above 300. Tons of power, swing and misses down a little bit. You could fast track him to AAA, and you could maybe see him in Omaha by June or July. And if he starts tearing up AAA pitching, which I imagine if he does well in AA, he would be able to do the same in AAA. Not always, but that's kind of my guess for a talent like him. And if we see that shift of him going from first base and DH to the outfield, I think that points a little bit to the Royals believing maybe by August or even earlier than that, Jac Caglianone could help out this lineup in Kansas City. And maybe that circles us back to what the theme of this offseason has been, which has been adding to the lineup. And they're still searching for that middle of the order bat. And when I got these questions in the past about, well, could Jac Caglianone break camp with the team? Could Jac Caglianone be that middle of the order bat? I said no, and I still believe it's no, because I don't think they would rush him to Kansas City before he even had a chance to have, a couple months at the minor league level. I understand that the talent is there. I understand the power is absolutely there. But you don't want to rush him, because if you rush him and things get screwed up, now you're kind of in that limbo of, well, should we send him back to AAA, AA? Does that hurt his confidence? What does he look like when he gets back to Kansas City? All of those things are going to be running through the mind of the Royals front office. But if this is the path that the Royals take, I think that now, at least, there is some legitimacy behind it. I don't think it's a pipe dream that he could be up in Kansas City in 2025, where in the past, I thought there's a chance, but I don't think I would see it until September, and it would mean him, just dominating at the minor league level. He doesn't really need to have, all league type of numbers to do that. I think we've seen in the past few years some organizations look at a very talented college hitter, know that college hitters are more mature than high school hitters, and they say, well, he's not gaining anything about dominating AA pitching or AAA pitching. We feel like the bat is good enough to compete at the major league level. And if you feel like that's the answer, then I do think that Jac Caglianone could have that fast track. I really do. Spring training isn't going to tell us everything. I believe that even if he plays well, let's say he hits 400 or 450 in the limited games he plays in, it's not going to be the automatic yes, where they say, well, he did great in spring training. Obviously, he can break camp with the team. He's now the middle of the order bat. I don't think that's going to happen. He could be the best player in Royal spring training, and I don't believe that would happen, because the goal is going to be to probably cut down the swing and miss at the minor league level and have that defensive flexibility. To me, those are going to be the two biggest things. I think offensively, most of his game is mature. I mean, he's got tools at the plate that only some prospects can dream of. He's a big kid, tons of raw power. I think he's got a good eye at the plate, but you can't take what he did in college and just translate it immediately to the minor league level, because in college, a lot of those pitchers didn't want to throw to him. That's why he had such a great walk rate. He didn't strike out as much. He was able to just torch college pitching. It's now different at the minor league level. You are a professional now, and there's a lot riding on your ability to reach that potential for Kansas City. Because I think a lot of fans out there believe that he and Bobby Witt Jr. are the future of this organization. that for years you're expecting Bobby Wood Jr. to hit second or third, and Jac Caglianone's right behind him. And they're putting up big-time numbers. You know, Jac Caglianone hopefully one day can be one of the most feared hitters in the American League, but he's got a ways to go. But this, attempt to put him out there in surprise, be around a big league clubhouse, be around some of these veterans, we've seen it before. Carter Jensen was in surprise last year. We actually talked to him while he was down there. So it doesn't necessarily mean they think he has a chance to make the team. But the part of that article done by Andy Rogers of MLB.com of they could look to move him to the outfield, that to me feels like they have a plan in place where if the bat really comes along, if we see a hot start in April or May, we could see that shift to the outfield where they start to get him comfortable with a corner outfield spot. And if things continue to progress at the plate, I do think there's a possibility that he gets up in 2025. There's also another aspect to this. The Royals have to be contending. If they are competing for a postseason spot, it would then make sense to bring him up. If the Royals are not contending and they take a step back, and even if Jac Caglianone is playing well, to me, it doesn't make much sense to rush him at that point. I think you would just wait till the season wraps up. Then come 2026, and probably by opening day 2026, you could pencil him into the lineup. So that part of it, I think, is really interesting to me because I thought Jac Caglianone was the first baseman of the future, and that certainly could still be the case. But knowing that they're open to moving him to an outfield spot, you only do that if you think they have a chance to impact and help your team at the big league level. If they thought that he was going to be a first baseman only, and you invite him to spring training, he gets to show out in front of some of the big leaguers and some of the Royals fans that make the trip out there, that's one thing. The fact that on top of that, coming to spring training, you talk about if things go well at the plate, we would look into moving him. You only do that if you think that he can help your team right now. And I do believe the Royals think that. They know about the power. They know about the potential. They know about the ceiling. If it all comes together, I think there's a chance you could see Jac Caglianone in Kansas City in 2025. Still a big if, right? Because we haven't seen him in the minor league level for an extended period of time. But if that all comes together, I do believe that can be the case. And the Royals do think that. I think that a lot of people in baseball believe that could be the case, and he wouldn't be an outlier. Wyatt Langford, a Florida Gator as well, did that for the Rangers a few years back. Nowadays in big league baseball, you don't need 2, 3, 4 years at the minor league level to become polished. If you're good enough and you showcase that, you could be up to the big league level maybe as early as your first year in minor league ball. Okay, let's take our first break of the show. When we come back, it's been a while since we've talked about Jonathan India. How much can he boost this lineup in 2025? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first sponsor and our only sponsor today in FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. For my pick, I'll stay local here in Kansas City. Big game coming up on Saturday at 3:30 between the Chiefs and the Texans. Give me the over on rushing yards for Patrick Mahomes. Playoff Mahomes is always a different beast, and I feel like he uses his legs just a little bit more in those games. So I will take the over on rushing yards for Patrick Mahomes. Like I said before the break, it's been a while since we've talked about Jonathan India. And because that deal happened so early on in the offseason, it was November 22nd to be exact. I'm looking at the transaction wire right here. You have to go all the way back to November 22nd to when that deal happened. And sometimes when deals happen so early on in the offseason, we exhaust that talk, and especially with how quiet the offseason's been, we exhausted that talking about the first week. Because when you are in the offseason, you can only talk about what the player was, not what the player will be in 2025, at least in my opinion, until you get closer to spring training. Once you see how your lineup comes to shape a little bit more, now we can start talking about what that player could be. And with Jonathan India, I really do believe that he might have the biggest single impact for where he is in the lineup. And let me clarify that and clear that up a little bit more. Like Bobby Witt Jr. turning into an MVP candidate was the single most transformative thing for the lineup last year. I mean, to go from certainly an MVP candidate in the second half of 2023, but for a full season, you saw one spot in the lineup every time he was up. He was a game changer. Salvador Perez kind of right there behind him. But, you know, those were spots in 2023 that also didn't get a lot of production, right? Bobby Witt Jr. would hit leadoff, then he'd hit second, then he'd hit third. But to know where he hit every single time in the 2-hole, like you noticed how much of an improvement it was. I think seeing, let's go with Vinny Pasquantino, having him in the lineup at the 3-hole when he was thriving, you saw a big improvement. And so what I'm getting at with Jonathan India is because the leadoff spot was such a black hole last year, I believe you will see the biggest improvement in that spot compared to everywhere else. Like it's tough for Bobby Witt Jr. to make you think differently about him in the 2-hole, even improve because of how good he was last year. Like if he follows it up with the same year, you're not going to notice that big of a change because he did the exact same thing in 2024. You know, Vinny Pasquantino has an all-star type of year. I think you will certainly see it, but we also view Vinny Pasquantino in a different way. We view him as a good baseball player. And when he does perform well, you think, well, that's what I expected from him. The reason I think Jonathan India can improve a lot and improve this lineup is because of the production in 2024. Maikel Garcia was not it. Tommy Pham was not it. Michael Massey, even though we had that spark in the postseason, I don't view him as a premier leadoff hitter. I'm not saying Jonathan India is going to be an all-star. I'm not saying Jonathan India is going to be one of the top hitters on this team. But how he approaches each and every at-bat, I think you're going to see a big difference. Where even before Maikel Garcia, the time with Whit Merrifield, the time with Alcides Escobar, those were guys that liked to ambush you, right? Those were guys that liked to swing first pitch. They didn't see many pitches at the plate. Now, it is a little bit skewed because Maikel Garcia, if you look at the numbers, he does see a decent amount of pitches at the plate. He's just not an on-base guy. He doesn't draw a lot of walks. And when he's slumping, you do see a lot of that first pitch swinging, second pitch swinging, ground outs, lazy flyouts. It happens. And the reality is he's just not a leadoff hitter. I think he's closer to a bottom of the order hitter or a super utility guy. Jonathan India for the Reds last year, I think took a little bit of a step back, but still was an above league average hitter. You talk about WRC plus, OPS plus, what the Royals got from the leadoff spot. It was one of the worst in baseball. You talk about walk rate, the leadoff spot. It just was not great. It was near the bottom in all of baseball. Jonathan India brings over the 5th best walk rate in all of baseball last year. And he sees a lot of pitches. And know the tremendous power that he had in Cincinnati when he'd go on those certain stretches. That's not going to translate to Kauffman Stadium because Great American Ballpark is a launching pad. Kauffman Stadium's not, of course. And I don't even think he's that much of a power hitter to begin with. You might be able to get 10 to 15 home runs out of him. But from the leadoff spot, you're not asking for power. You're talking about on base. And considering he's going to be hitting in front of Bobby Witt Jr., think about how vital that is. When the first 4 guys in the lineup you have to face would be India in the walk rate, Bobby Witt Jr., a healthy Vinny Pasquantino, and hopefully Salvador Perez, who can build off an incredible 2024. Now you talk about the middle of the order bat. If that guy could be a Taylor Ward type, you feel really good about the first 5 in your lineup. But last year, when you had that black hole in the leadoff position, it exploited a lot of the Royals' weaknesses because to begin games, 1 out, and Bobby Witt Jr. comes up with nobody on. Late in the game, who did you want to face? Bobby Witt Jr., the leadoff bat. Now you might have to grind it out with Jonathan India to get to Bobby Witt Jr. And I think that's why Jonathan India will have such a good chance to thrive, not just because he brings a great walk rate. Think about the pitches he's going to get. Because even though Jonathan India is an upgrade over what the Royals had at the leadoff spot, he didn't have Bobby Witt Jr. hitting behind him in the lineup last year. There were good hitters in Cincinnati, and it was a hitter's ballpark. But they're not going to be throwing to Jonathan India the same way they did last year compared to this year. They're not going to be, I would say, pitching around him as much. I don't think you're going to see a lot of those 4-pitch walks. That certainly will happen because some guys are a bit erratic. Some guys just don't have any control. But I think he's going to get a lot of hittable pitches, which is then going to boost the offensive numbers, right? It may dip the walk rate a little bit because if you're seeing a lot of strikes, you're not going to try to walk up there. But I do think he's got that discipline where if he is slightly being pitched around, he's able to spit on those pitches where the guys hitting from the leadoff spot last year were not able to do so. So you get those hittable pitches because you got the protection behind you and Bobby Witt Jr. They just don't want to gift you a base to face Bobby Witt Jr. now with the runner on. He's going to have an opportunity to really boost those numbers last year. And that's why I believe individually, the spot in the lineup you're going to know the biggest improvement, I believe, is the leadoff position. I really do. If Jonathan India stays healthy, I think that he's got that opportunity at the top of the order to really thrive. And I think the best part about his game, which in my opinion is the walk rate, that automatically puts you in a better position than they were last year. Because you talk about slumps. Last year when those guys went through slumps, they weren't able to really get out of it with grinding it out. It was a lot of pitchers attacking them with pitches in the zone, and they were swinging and not really getting solid contact. If you're slumping at the plate, a guy like Jonathan India, you still have that walk rate. You still have that discipline where you can find ways to get on base. And I believe at the top of the order, it's so vital for this group to have somebody ahead of Bobby Witt Jr. that can get on base. Jonathan India is going to be able to do that. And I actually do believe even if that walk rate dips a little bit, it's probably more so because pitchers are going to be challenging him and risk him getting a double, risk him hitting one out. Rather than not give him anything to hit, you put him on base, and now Bobby Witt Jr. is at the plate. You have that protection right behind him. I think that's going to be able to boost some of his offensive numbers. And in a ballpark like Kauffman Stadium, it is a pitcher's park. It's also a wide open outfield. You can go gap to gap a little bit. Maybe you have an Andrew Benintendi type of resurgence. But I also don't think Jonathan India was where Andrew Benintendi was before he came over to Kansas City. Still thought he put together a fine 2024. Certainly can improve, but I believe that'll be one spot in the lineup you really see the improvement at the top of the order. Okay, let's take our final break of the show. When we come back, got some questions on YouTube about Drew Waters. Where will he be this year in 2025? And maybe more importantly, will he be in Kansas City? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That is at JOHNYJ_15. The final thing we're going to wrap up the show with is talking about someone who didn't see much time in Kansas City in 2024, which was Drew Waters. He, along with a couple other prospects, didn't really get that chance up in Kansas City. And I think the biggest reason why is that the Royals were good. They didn't have many open spots on the roster, even when players such as Adam Frazier and Garrett Hampson struggled. They weren't going to replace those guys with Drew Waters or Nick Pratto. And that brings us to a bit of a crossroads in 2025, I believe. And it really comes down to what they view Drew Waters as moving forward. Do they feel like in spring training you make a few adjustments here and there? I mean, we know the outfield depth right now in Kansas City. It's not very good. I mean, right now, they would be running back the same outfield. And it was one of the bottom outfields in all of baseball with MJ Melendez, Kyle Isbell, and Hunter Renfroe. You have Hunter Renfroe, who wasn't very durable last year, MJ Melendez, who took another step back, and then Kyle Isbell, who's really only known for his defense. The opportunities could be there for Drew Waters. But I even saw last year in spring training, a good spring training, I might add, and a great start in Omaha, the Royals just kind of disregard it. And not that they weren't paying attention. They certainly were. They keep tabs on every single team in the minor league level, and certainly guys that are playing well at the minor league level. But with Drew Waters, I think we have seen a big enough sample size at this point at the big league level that you can't really take the AAA numbers and expect them to continue in Kansas City. And that's why I'm always a little bit skeptical of a guy hitting 330 with a 395 OBP and maybe a 480, 490 slug, because it is AAA pitching. You're not facing the cream of the crop. In fact, I go back to last year. Nick Lofton was somebody that had a phenomenal season in AAA. When he was down there, he produced. When he got to Kansas City, it didn't translate. Drew Waters, kind of the same thing. And I do believe that the defense is something you can take note of. His switch hitting is, I think, another thing that gives him a bit of a boost, right? That, you put him in there as a pinch hitter. He's got the advantage at the plate and facing the weaker hand, if you will. But I think the swing and miss part to his game, we talk about that so much when it comes to guys like Nick Prado, guys like Drew Waters, guys like, MJ Melendez, guys like Nelson Velasquez. The swing and miss is really something you need to pay attention to, especially when they've got good numbers at the minor league level. Because that was something I took away with Nick Prado. That was something I took away with Drew Waters, and why, for the most part, they didn't stick in Kansas City. Hey, if you are striking out 25 to 30% of the time in AAA, that's going to be far worse when you get to the major league level. And Drew Waters, when he got that short stint with the Royals in 2024, I don't believe he did enough to warrant that. Well, let's take a longer look here. Maybe we can fix some things. We can tinker with some things because the Royals were just in a spot where they needed production every single night. They couldn't have somebody up there constantly going through a slump, not showing any signs of improvement, and expect them to figure things out, because you only really do that, in my opinion, to guys that have gotten out of a slump before. If you have Salvador Perez up there and he's slumping, you're not going to bench him. Of course, you're not demoting him, because you've seen him get out of slumps before. We've seen Bobby Witt Jr. get out of slumps before. We've seen Vinny Pasquantino get out of slumps before. Hell, we've even seen MJ Melendez get out of a really bad slump before. But if you are somebody that hasn't really shown in a smaller sample size in your career that you can get out of a slump and not only get out of it, but really be an above average contributor to the lineup, they're not going to give you a longer leash. And with Drew Waters, I think at this point, they just view him as outfield depth. If there were injuries in the outfield, he would have that opportunity to come up to Kansas City. But now I think there are guys that have a little bit of an edge over him. I think if, I don't believe they're going to run back the same outfield. I still believe that middle of the order bat will be another outfielder. But if they do, I think you would see Nick Lofton get a shot over him because of the super utility, because of the defensive flexibility. I think you would see somebody like Tyler Gentry get another shot. Javi Vaz now is not far behind. And it also wouldn't surprise me if they boosted him as a trade chip. Now, you're going to have teams out there that are nowhere close to contending. They look at Drew Waters and they say, that was a former top prospect in the Braves system, had a cup of coffee with the Royals. We like the defense, the switch hitting, the power, the raw power at the plate. We got at bats to give to guys, and it wouldn't hurt to have a good defensive outfielder. They absolutely could leverage that going into spring training. And it wouldn't surprise me either. We see it in preseason in the NFL where a guy plays well in the preseason and they trade him for a sixth rounder or seventh rounder. See it all the time. In baseball, we do see it from time to time. And if the Royals were to trade him, maybe you get a minor league pitcher at that. Maybe you could get, some depth at the AAA level or the AA level. He wouldn't get a lot in return, but now he's a little bit blocked when you think about it. I mean, I believe the Royals are going to go out there and make a move for another outfielder. You still have Dairon Blanco in Kansas City. They love his ability to steal bases on the base path. You've got guys that have the defensive flexibility to go to the outfield. That's another part that blocks him. And the swing and miss to his game is something that really never has improved with the Royals. It was also a problem when he was in the Braves organization. And that's why I think going into spring training, look, he could play well, but I kind of hope he would play well and then get an opportunity elsewhere because I just don't know where it is in Kansas City. The Royals love Kyle Isbell. Hunter Renfroe's back. MJ Melendez, I believe, is going to be on the big league roster, but I could also see a move happening to get a left fielder. I don't believe Drew Waters is going to be in Kansas City to be the fourth outfielder. If they go out there and make a move, that now moves MJ Melendez the fourth outfielder, and then you have Dairon Blanco. There's just not an opportunity for him. So I would hope he gets a chance to compete at the big league level again and even be a starter somewhere. I'm just not sold that it's going to be in Kansas City. All right, that's going to do it for our Tuesday edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll be back on Thursday with more offseason talk to go over and talk about spring training, some of the names that will be there, anybody that may surprise us in surprise. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.